So, ladies and gentlemen, 1984 was a heady time. Not like 2025. You got somebody like Donald Trump is threatening economic war against his allies to placate his antichrist ego trip. But this was a real movie that looked at the real impact of nuclear war, or the theory of nuclear war in the mid 1980s. It came after the big hit in the States the day after. And for what was a small production, it's still very effective. 41 years later, again, it's one of the best non-fiction movies about nuclear war. It's called Threats. This 1984 British apocalyptic war drama is basically a BBC production with participation from the Nine Network on Australian and Western World Television. Shot at a budget of only £400,000. It was released on 23rd September 1984. Written by Barry Hines and directed and produced by Mick Jackson, is a dramatic account of nuclear war and its effects in Britain, specifically on the beautiful city of Sheffield in northern England. The plot centers on two families as a confrontation between the States and the Soviet Union erupts. After a nuclear exchange between NATO and the Warsaw Pact begins, the film depicts the medical, economic, social, and environmental consequences of nuclear war. Now shot again on a small budget, the film was the first of its kind to depict a nuclear winter. It has been called a film which comes closest to representing the full horror of nuclear war and its aftermath, as well as the catastrophic impact that the event would have on human culture. It has been compared to the earlier Academy Award-winning program The War Game, which came out in '66, produced in the United Kingdom 2 decades prior, and its contemporary counterpart the day after, as 83 ABC TV film starring Jason Robards and John Lithgow, which depict a similar scenario in the States. And of course, the Specialist Production 5, if you can find it, it talks about 5 survivors of the war. It was nominated for 7 BAFTAs and won for Best Single Drama, Best Design, Best Film Cameraman, and Best Film Editor. It was starring Karen Bahar and Reese Dinsdale. Executive producers were Graham Massey and John Purdy, with Jackson and Peter Wolfs as producer. And of course, cinematography is very strong, Andrew Dunn and Paul Morris. Now, running time of 112 minutes, but it's a tough watch. Now, in the English city of Sheffield, young adults Ruth Beckett and Jimmy Kent plan to marry after learning of Ruth's unplanned pregnancy. Meanwhile, an international crisis develops after the Soviet Union invades northern Iran in response to an American-backed coup in the country. The situation rapidly escalates when the USS Los Angeles sinks and American troops are deployed to unoccupied western Iran to defend its oil supplies. Daily life in Sheffield continues, while an American ultimatum demanding joint withdrawal from Iran expires. Now, during the movie, it's basically saying, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the quick escalation. After a limited nuclear exchange in Masad, the crisis culminates in armed conflict breaking out between the two superpowers. News of the breakout of fighting spurs British citizens into panic buying and looting, resulting in the enabling of emergency government powers across the UK for civil defence purposes. Officials of Sheffield City Council and many others across the nation take shelter in makeshift basement bunkers to command the area should central government be destroyed, with many being forced to leave their families behind. Now, as the UK prepares for the possibility of nuclear war, over the course of 2 days, society gradually destabilizes as panic buying, looting, and violent suppression of anti-war protests takes place across the country. Now, early in the morning, the Soviets launched a nuclear strike, first disabling communications across Britain and northwestern Europe before attacking NATO military targets, then economic and industrial centers. The attack injures and kills tens of millions and causes fires and devastation. Jimmy attempts to find Ruth and is never seen again. His brother Michael is killed in an initial firestorm. His mother is horribly burned and later dies, while his father suffers from the subsequent radiation poisoning. Jimmy's sister Allison seems to be the only survivor of the family, though she's only ever seen in a makeshift prison and never seen again after that. Now, the damage quickly results in societal collapse. Firefighting and rescue attempts are halted to avoid spreading fallout. Hospitals are overwhelmed and under-equipped, and the Sheffield officials die in their bunker, buried under rubble of Sheffield Town Hall over the course of a month. Local authority breaks down, martial law is implemented, and survivors are mostly left to fend for themselves. Food becomes scarce as a result of looting and nuclear winter-induced crop failures, resulting in it becoming the only form of currency awarded for labor and withheld as punishment. The nuclear winter blocks out sunlight and drops temperatures drastically, resulting in severely diminished harvests and the death of many survivors. Now, It basically from there it talks to about the transition after the bomb, and as it goes along. 1 year later, Ruth eventually gives birth to her daughter alone in an abandoned barn while being howled at by a mad chained dog. Now, 1 year later, sunlight levels have mostly returned to normal, though damage to the ozone layer means that higher ultraviolet radiation levels have increased the risk of suffering cataracts and skin cancer. 10 years later, what remains of Britain's surviving population has dropped to a medieval level of 4 to 11 million people, and UK remains devastated. Survivors primarily work in cultivating crops by hand or with basic tools. Children born after the war speak a reduced and broken form of English due to the absence of organized schooling, the long-term psychological effects of fetal radiation exposure, and the elective mutism of adult survivors. Ruth dies in bed, prematurely aged and blinded by cataracts. She's survived by her daughter Jane, who stands by Ruth's bed as she dies. She responds with apathy to her mother's death and seals the last of her possessions, leaving behind Jimmy's bird book, which Ruth had still kept with her. Now, 3 years after Ruth's death, industry begins to return with limited electricity achieved through steam power, but the population continues to live in squalor. Jane and 2 boys are caught stealing food. One of the boys is shot dead, and Jane and the other boy engage in a struggle for food that degenerates into crude intercourse. Months later, Jane gives birth in a makeshift hospital. The nurse wraps a silent baby in a bloody sheet and gives it to Jane, who licks at it in horror. Like I said, a rough watch. Now, Threads was first commissioned under the working title Beyond Armageddon by the Director General of BBC, Alastair Milne, after he watched the 66 drama documentary The War Game, which had not been shown on BBC when it was made due to pressure from the Wilson government, although it had a limited release in cinemas. Now, according to screenwriter Barry Hines, our intention in making Threads was to step aside from the politics and hope convincingly show the actual effects on either side should our best endeavors to prevent nuclear war failed. Now, auditions for the cast were held in Sheffield, and again, 1,100 candidates show up. Extras were chosen on the basis of height and age, and are all told to look miserable and to wear ragged clothing. Now, for the horror Threads to work, Jackson made an effort to leave some things unseen, to let images and emotion happen in people's minds, or rather, the extensions of their imaginations. Now, again, a co-production of BBC 9 and Western World Television, first broadcast on BBC 2 on September 23rd at 9:30 p.m., and had the highest ratings on the channel of the week at 7 million. Around 600 extras from the Sheffield area were invited to a private screening and at the broadcasts. It was repeated on August 1st, 1985 as part of a week of programs marking the 40th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which also saw the first television screening of The War Game. Threads was not shown again on British screens until the digital channel BBC 4 broadcasted in 2003. It was also shown on a UK TV documentary in September 2004 and April 2005. Threads was eventually broadcasted on TBS Superstation on January 13, 1985, with Ted Turner presenting the introduction. It was following the next day by a broadcast of the episode of the BBC documentary series Natural World on the 8th day about nuclear war. Now, in Canada, by the way, it was also shown in syndication and later on many PBS stations. In Canada, Threads was broadcast on City TV, CKVU in Vancouver, and CKNB in Winnipeg, and in New Zealand on TV New Zealand in September 1984. Now, usually for a commercial network, it broadcasts the film without commercial breaks. Many commercial outlets in the States and Canada broadcast the film, also did so without commercial interruption or interrupting only for disclaimers or promos. Now, released on BBC Video on VHS and Betamax in 1987, DVD came out in 2005. Now, the only part it was Chuck Berry's recording of Johnny Be Good was part of the movie, but due to licensing, that's, I think, the only major changes. Now, on the 13th of February 2018, Threads released by Severin Films on Blu-ray in the States. Now, a special edition also came out in 2018. Now, Threads at the time was not widely reviewed, but the critics who reviewed it gave generally positive reviews. Rick Groen of Globe and Mail wrote that the British crew here, headed by writer Barry Hines and producer and director Mick Jackson, accomplished what would seem to be an impossible task, depicting the carnage without distancing the viewer, without once letting him retreat but in safe wall of fictitious play. Now, retrospective reviews have been positive. On Metacritic, the film has a score of 92%, while on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 100% review. Now, Peter Bradshaw of The Guardian called it a masterpiece. It wasn't until I saw Threads that I found something on screen that could make me brew in a cold, shivering sweat and keep me in that commission for 20 minutes. Now, again, strong BAFTA nominations. Other key movies at the time, of course, was Testament and Five as well, which I think is one of the first, not major movies, but first movies to talk about nuclear winter. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a date movie. This is not a movie that, kids of a certain age should watch. But the fact is, Sheffield, England is very comparable, let's say, to Halifax, Nova Scotia, small cities across Canada. And like I said, we're not under like the Cold War now. Although, like I said before, Donald Trump's reinterpretation of the world will not be the golden age. That's just fucking bullshit. But like I said, I don't think you're going to find a nuclear war worldwide, because the war going on right now is economic, because the United States is basically trying to not say bankrupt the world, but trying to fool everybody saying we don't need you, and that's not going to happen. So, I mean, when we shut off the lights in the States with our power distribution and the 7 billion barrels of oil, we'll talk about it later. I might do a podcast on that. But like I said, Trump said earlier this week that God chose him to run the States, and that's why he wasn't assassinated. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, Trump has nothing to do with God. There's only one God he has, is himself. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're a Trump supporter and still on this channel, I want you gone. I don't want you to be part of the channel anymore, because I don't think this channel would support somebody's idiotic or that. Threads is an example where the real people join together to produce something to let the people know, let's look at this and be a warning not to have this happen. But if you are a Trump supporter on my channel, I want you gone. So you're going to have to censor yourself, and if you make any blatant comments, you will be reported as a hate crime. And we'll go from there and see what the Canadian authorities are going to do. I'm putting my foot down, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to clean up the channel. And for the people in the States who are sensible, you can stay. But the people in the States that are pure left-wing or right-wing, I don't want you here. Because if you watch Threads, it's an example of what can happen when things get out of control very quickly. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you're doing here with our movie podcast, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share.